Welcome to the Eating Disorder Recovery Podcast.
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 Welcome to the Eating Disorder Recovery Podcast with me, Dr. Janine Anderson. Heads up, this show may contain adult language and may mention specific foods. If you find either of those to be too triggering, I trust you to take care of yourself and do what you need to do. Hi, friends. I'm glad to be back with you for another episode of the Eating Disorder Recovery Podcast. Thank you so much to those of you who reached out to me to give me a warm welcome back after my long hiatus. And I've gotten really good feedback about our episode with the wonderful Dr. Jennifer Gaudiani of the Gaudiani Clinic. So thank you for reaching out, telling me that you're glad I'm back on the podcast. Thanks for always writing in and telling me about your recovery and your story. I always find your emails so interesting. And just thank you for your ongoing support and patience with the process. And always feel free to write me and let me know what is really helpful to you, what you like, or topics you want for me to try to cover in the future. I really do keep a list of those. And again, just a reminder, if there's a topic that you've suggested that I haven't gotten to, it just may be that that's coming further down the line. Sometimes I'm like, for a couple of instances, there are some topics I'm waiting to get a specific guest on to come talk to you all about that. So anyway, it just feels really good to be back. So this is the first solo episode of the second season of the podcast, and I'm going to do your Q&A. So a while ago, I had put a call out to you all to write me with your questions, and I thought I would just do a really informal Q&A. And some people, it's always fine to email me. You can email podcast@eatingdisorderrecoverypodcast.com with your questions too. But this is kind of a compilation of some of them, and from people who specifically were interested in having their questions read on the podcast. So other just brief announcements. Again, thank you so much for subscribing. If you're subscribed to the podcast, thank you. If you haven't, go ahead and click the subscribe button on iTunes and please leave us a review. That really, really, really helps the show out, and it makes it a lot easier for new people to find it. It makes it more searchable. So if you ever want to do me a favor, please do that. Also, if you want to connect with me on social media, I'm mostly on Facebook, and my Facebook page is facebook.com/Dr. Anderson Author. That's Dr. Anderson with an O, author. And I make all of my announcements, or when I pose questions to listeners where y'all can write in, that's where I do it. Is Facebook is mostly where I hang out. If you are a Twitter fanatic, you can tweet me. My Twitter handle is Dr. Janine, DrJanean. I don't use Twitter as much. And also, I think it's confusing because my first name is spelled weird. Thanks, Mom and Dad. And I don't know, it's just not my favorite. So if you want to find me on Facebook. Also, a couple of people have been asking about when is the book coming out? This fall of 2017. So stay tuned on Facebook for announcements about when that is happening. Okay, so let's get to it. The first couple of questions are about body image. So I had a listener write in, really lovely woman who's working so hard in her recovery, and she's working on weight restoration. And she wrote about how she has a, quote, weird distribution of weight. And so as she's been restoring weight, it's coming back in a shape that her eating disorder isn't super excited about. And she wrote, I was wondering if there were any resources you could share wherein people share their stories about weight gain and possibly similar situations like I've described. Great question. Thank you so much for writing in with that. The first thing that comes to mind for me is just the general strategy of filling your social media with pro-recovery, body positive, health at every size content. Because I don't think our social media feeds are recovery friendly unless we make them so. So that's something I always recommend to clients who I work with and people in general who want to feel better about their bodies, want to improve their relationship with food, is you need to seek that material out and follow it and make sure that that is coming through your social media feeds. A couple of the ones that I think of off the top of my head, first, if you haven't gone to National Eating Disorder Association's website. It's nationaleatingdisorders.org. You need to. That is an incredible hub of information. There is so much stuff on NIDA's website. It's ridiculous. Like, I haven't even been able to sift through everything that they have on there. And of course, it's NIDA, so all of the information is really wonderful. It's really easy to understand. And NIDA has a really cool feature on there that's a recovery forum. And so you can go and share your stories and chat with other people who are in recovery too. Another similar sort of online forum for being able to discuss body image is Dr. Anita Johnston's Light of the Moon Cafe course. If you take her online course, the Light of the Moon Cafe, not only is it awesome because it's Dr. Johnston and she is a freaking goddess. She's actually, I don't know, just when you're around her, you can tell she's amazing and so insightful. But in addition to getting all of the course material, you get access to their online support circle. And she's talked about on the podcast how people on there only offer support. There's no advice giving. The women in that group are really amazing. So those are a couple of places that I'm thinking of. In terms of body positive social media, I would definitely follow any of the pages that are about health at every size by Linda Bacon. There's also a page called The Body Acceptance Media. I follow them. There's a wonderful blog out there called Beauty Redefined, and it's at beautyredefined.org. They're not an eating disorder recovery blog, but they are a blog about positive body image, women's empowerment, and they write a lot about how women's bodies especially are objectified and how that detracts from us being able to have positive body image. So they're very inclusive and celebrate the diversity that really is there in bodies of all different kinds. So those are the kind of things that come to mind for me. So 1, fill your feed with all good stuff, body positive stuff. Make sure that you're counteracting all the crap that comes through there. And 2, seeking out specific spaces or blogs that are like that. And again, recommended is Dr. Johnston's Light of the Moon Cafe course, and then also NIDA's website where they have forums. Moving on to our second question. This is a question from a listener who wrote me talking about how she's also been working so hard in her recovery. This is, of course, a theme. And she said she's working on embracing messages like being beautiful no matter what she weighs. And she wanted to hear on the podcast about being able to do that, but also how she feels like there are conflicting messages everywhere. And then also on kind of another layer on top of that, she said that her family has been commenting on her food choices, even though they know that she's in recovery. So to this listener, my heart goes out to you. It's such a tough situation. And one thing that I tell people is that recovery is counterculture. Being in recovery, one of the necessary things that you have to do to recover is you have to let go of the diet mentality. You have to get out of diet culture. You cannot hang on to that and recover from your eating disorder. I do think that they're actually mutually exclusive. We have to let go of that bit by bit through lots of support and education and activism, and probably lots of practice and therapy, to be honest. And it is hard because I believe that a lot of the culture out there, particularly in America, is very, very, very diet-driven, pro-diet. And a lot of the time, the diet mentality operates under this icky, false guise of health. And we know and will continue to explore until the last days of this podcast how weight is not the most important factor in our health, and that health is so broad. So the first thing is regarding the family piece, I always think it is much better to be direct and assert your needs with people, even if it doesn't pan out that well, versus hanging on to it, never saying anything, holding all these resentments in yourself, feeling upset all the time, and then exploding one day, because we all know that that's where it goes. At least That's where it goes for me. So I like to bring stuff up as it goes along. So your family members may not be realizing the impact of what they're saying, and they may think that genuinely they are being helpful to you. Now, do not hear that as me excusing that or minimizing the impact that that has on your feelings. That's not what I'm saying at all. I totally understand, like personally, what it's like to have your family members comment on your food, comment on your shape, comment on your progress in recovery. It's really frustrating. And like this listener who wrote in said, it's really hurtful. But I do think it is most helpful to people if you let them know what the impact is. Hey, Mom, I know that you didn't mean for it to be this way, but I just wanted to let you know that when you comment on me eating pizza, it makes me feel really self-conscious about pizza. It makes me feel like you're judging my body, and it brings up a lot of anxiety that I have to work through. And then here's the kicker. Tell them what you want them to do. Could you please refrain from commenting on any of my food choices? Could you please refrain from making any comments about my weight? At this, it's just not helpful. So always letting people know the impact and then giving them something to do. And especially if you can frame it in not just the, hey, don't do that, but if you can give them something to do instead. Like you may tell your mom in this example, Mom, it would be a lot more helpful to me if you could check in with me about how I've been feeling lately, or if you could check in with me about how is my recovery going. It all depends on what you need and what you want. I know some clients I work with like never want for their families to check in or anybody else to check in with them on recovery, and other people feel like that's very supportive. So that's just up to you. You know what you need, you know what you want. And then getting back to the original part of the question. So beyond the family stuff that this listener is dealing with, she asked about how can she really work through these conflicting messages, because she's trying to feel beautiful no matter what she weighs, but she's also getting conflicting messages. And so I want to just acknowledge that and say, yes, there are conflicting messages. Both messages are out there. You're beautiful no matter what you weigh. And then there are also a ton of messages that say, you're not beautiful enough at that size. That size is not good enough. This needs to be changed. This needs to be smaller. This needs to be more toned. And the thing is, you get to pick which one you want to live your life by. And it's hard. I would never deny how oppressive and pervasive those messages about changing your body are. And even though they're everywhere, I know I just don't want to live that way. Those things are not important to me. To me, it does matter more that I really don't think that beauty is connected to weight. I don't think weight is connected to very much that I care about at all. That's just not what I value anymore. When I was struggling with my eating disorder, on the other hand, I was pretty much the only thing I valued. And I was miserable, and it made me shallow, and it took away all the depth of my character. And so, of course, there are conflicting messages. The whole world is not going to say, you're perfect just the way you are. Don't try to change anything. People are always going to want to sell you things so that you can spend money on their products or using their services to change your body. But you don't need to opt into that. You can opt out. So I always just acknowledge, yep, there are lots of conflicting messages. But at the end of the day, what do you want to be about? Which one do you want to be about? And so for a lot of these questions, there's not a great, straightforward, easy answer. And that's kind of where I'm at. I see both, but I don't pick all that nonsense about needing to change my body. It doesn't work for me. I've tried it. Okay. Another listener wrote in, how can you, as a person with an eating disorder, not become offended or unreceptive to the support offered? And this is by other people, which is an awesome question. So again, not a really straightforward, great answer. First, I want to start by validating how incredibly disappointing, isolating, frustrating it can be when you're trying to share with friends or family, and whatever their response is not the kind of support that you want. So a lot of what I've heard is that friends or family want to instantly cheer you up, or They want to rush you through your feelings and have you feel better right away. Or they tell you that things aren't so bad, or will say things like things are going to get better. It's going to be okay. It can't be hard forever. And I think a lot of the time people experience that as being invalidating, and it shuts people down, or at least it runs the risk of shutting people down, because most likely you're opening up to someone just trying to share what your experience is at that point in time, what you're feeling, what you're thinking about, what you've been going through. And I think a lot of us don't actually need somebody to wrap it up in a bow. I think most of the time we're looking to not feel alone, and we're looking to feel like someone hears us and understands us. And if you tell somebody, I'm struggling so much with my recovery, I just feel so hopeless, I feel really exhausted from all the work I'm doing, and they say, you know what, chin up, you can do it. You just got to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You're going to be all right. Instantly, that doesn't leave any room for explanation or exploration of how you're feeling. It really cuts off the connection. It makes it so that you need to resolve that right away. And as you all know, things don't always get resolved instantly. In fact, I feel like they rarely do. So a couple of things that I try to keep in mind and talk with my clients a lot for when they seek support. So the first thing is that, one, it's really hard, but we also have to maintain compassion for the people who are supporting us, just like they need to maintain compassion for us. And that may mean giving them a little bit of leeway, a little bit of grace when their support isn't perfect. And even I've heard Jenny Schaefer talk about this publicly, and she doesn't say it in this way, but she talks about how if you haven't had an eating disorder, you just cannot understand it in the same way as someone who does have an eating disorder or has had one in the past. That's just not possible. It's not going to happen. So I talk with clients about how to have realistic, fair expectations of the people around us. So I'm not saying settle. I'm not saying don't seek support. I'm not saying make excuses for when people give you crappy responses. I am not saying that. But I do think we have to be realistic about, if you are talking with your best friend who's never been through an eating disorder, she is not going to be able to wrap her head and her heart around this thing like you are if you have one. And that's okay. That her support can still mean a lot. And so part of what I would encourage you to check in with and to challenge yourself with is, are my expectations for other people's support of me reasonable? I mean, keep them high, but also make sure that they're reasonable. If you are always looking for a depth of connection that can only come from somebody who's had an eating disorder themselves, and you're talking to people who've never had an eating disorder, it's a setup. So part of that is compassion, compassion, compassion. They can't get it on the level that you can. And two, adjusting expectations as needed. That way we're not making it seem like people in our lives who are trying to support us suck and they just can't do it. And then the third piece is coaching people on what makes you feel most supported. So you can't control for the outcome of how other people do everything, but you can tell them what you need, and you can help them, and you can praise them when they do something really well, and you can give them some guidance when things don't go in the way that you need. I do think that it's okay to let people know what makes you feel most supported. I just met with a client this evening who, what makes her feel most supported with her partner is she doesn't like it when he checks in with her on food at all. She doesn't want him to ever say anything about her food, but she does want for him to ask, how are you feeling today? And she does want for him to ask, how's your eating disorder been today? That way she can tell him about whether her eating disorder thoughts have been raging all day or whether it's been a pretty good day. So I don't know what support looks like for you. And I know that that can be a tricky one to figure out. And a good starting point can be thinking about what makes you not feel supported, what feels unsupportive. So start there. Give your people, your support network feedback. You don't want them to do that. And then tell them what you want instead. We can't always get perfect support, but we also don't want to set our support people up in our minds to feel like, gosh, they just don't do it well enough, you know? Okay. That was an awesome question. Really hard question too. This is actually a distant online friend, so we've never met, but Mandy, this is for you. She wrote in and said that she can't eat these certain food groups. I'm not going to read them for you all. And she goes to these social gatherings and she, it sounds like she's allergic, and she avoids these foods. And then she says when she does go to social gatherings and she avoids these foods, she has a lot of negative self-talk around her she calls it a pansy issue, and kind of feels like she self-sabotages with that. She says she feels embarrassed to eat with her friends because she can't eat those foods. And then she also said she feels embarrassed because she thinks that they don't know what to feed her if they have to make food for her. And then she talks about how it's kind of tricky to figure out if she can participate in eating what they make, and maybe sometimes when she can't. She says, I know they love me and want to support me. How do I convince myself that it is not part of the food neuroses to avoid foods that actually hurt me? I know what's good for me. Why do I let my inner critic drive the bus? Preach, girl. I think all of us have let the inner critic drive the bus. I mean, that happens from time to time. And I feel like in general, I wish we would stop commenting on other people's food across the board, because other people's food is none of your business. You get to make up your mind and do whatever you want to do with your food choices, but nobody else. And so my hunch is that she's commenting on how, in addition to there being a lot of talk about food sensitivity and allergy and intolerance, that there's kind of been a backlash to that a bit, where people then start doubting the legitimacy of people's allergy or intolerance, whatever, inability to eat whatever food. And to me, that's so unfortunate. So things that I think of are, one, I really think it's so helpful to use your body as the guide for things. So yes, go to a doctor and see an allergist and get your allergies checked out with an actual allergist. Don't do like the online tests that tell you you're allergic to everything in the world, but go get that checked out. And then beyond that, we have to think about that there are people who really cannot eat certain foods. And if your body gets really, really sick every time you eat a certain food, and especially after you talk with your doctor, a doctor who you trust, who's not going to put you on a diet about it, yeah, maybe you can't eat certain foods, and that happens sometimes. So in general, I feel like if we didn't have this weird tendency to comment on other people's food and to feel entitled to be able to comment on other people's foods, this probably wouldn't be a problem. So similar to a previous question, if you have the rapport with people who are supporting you to be able to tell them the impact of what's going on for you, or to just be able to talk about your internal process, like, gosh, I just feel so embarrassed because I can't eat these foods, and I know that that doesn't make any sense. I legitimately can't. I always think it's more helpful to make those implicit things explicit, because maybe there are friends who think, oh gosh, there's no need for you to feel embarrassed. I've never thought about that. And then if there are people who have made negative comments about it, I would definitely nip that in the bud. I mean, there are I don't want to say I don't let anything slide anymore, but through my recovery and through being a businesswoman and just getting older, I don't really let any of those comments slide by me anymore. And that's what works for me. So, but in general, I let people know if what they're saying is hurtful or offensive to me. And I also let them know that that's not okay, and that I don't want for that to just slide by unchecked. I don't think that that's fair. So if you're comfortable with doing that, I would highly recommend being able to bring it up too, that you don't appreciate it when somebody's commenting on your food, and you don't have to explain or go into your whole story. Just setting the boundary is enough. Just saying, I don't like it when you comment on my food. Please don't. That's enough. That's enough. And then the work around the inner critic, just make peace with the inner critic now. It's part of you. And usually it's trying to tell us something. So I would be interested in eventually hearing what you think your inner critic is trying to tell you or trying to protect you from. That's usually what they do. And again, really getting back to your body, because it sounds like you know how your body feels when you eat those foods, and you know that you cannot eat them anymore. So yeah, setting aside what other people think, setting aside any fear of their judgment, who knows if they're judging you or not, and really kind of getting back to just taking care of yourself. And I know, way more easily said than done. That would probably take a lot of practice, but that's my answer for you. Okay. One more, let's see, listener question here. Somebody wrote in right after the pediatric eating disorder episode with Dr. Kelsey Latimer, and she wrote, can you do an episode on long-term recovery for adults? That is a really broad topic. So I just want to talk a little bit about long-term recovery for adults. So I don't even know how to summarize the whole recovery process, and that probably cannot be done. Unfortunately, one of the most common questions I get is, what does recovery look like? Which is an awesome question, but it's also next to impossible for me to answer because that is so highly individual. It's not uncommon for people who have had eating disorders for longer to have multiple points in treatment or multiple stays and higher level of care. It's quite common. So if that's the boat that you're in, don't feel bad about that. Just keep pressing forward towards your full recovery. Another thing that we know is that eating disorders can be harder to treat when they've been going on for longer. So that may mean that you may need more treatment, or you may need to stay in treatment a little bit longer. So again, I'm really not sure what that will look like for you, but those are a couple of things to think about. And let's see, long-term recovery. I guess I also want to mention having high points and low points, also totally normal. I don't know of anybody personally or professionally who has recovered from an eating disorder who didn't have relapses. And some people don't like that word. So I don't know, whatever word makes you feel more comfortable than relapses, use that one instead. But just expect that. Something I read recently, and I couldn't track down the actual article, but one of the things that we're learning from research with eating disorders is that a lot of the time when we do eating disorder research, the follow-up to patients who are in the study are like 6 months after treatment, 1 year after treatment, 2 years after treatment. And that's really not that long. Like if any of you think about how long you've been working on your eating disorder or how long you've had your eating disorder, you know that 6 months after you have a certain course of therapy is like, I don't know, a blink of the eye. But what we're discovering is that if we look at recovery and we zoom out past just 6 months or a year, that if we take like a 10-year perspective or a 20-year perspective, many, many, many more people are reporting that they are becoming recovered. So I would think about that with long-term recovery as well, that it takes a long time for most people. I wish it went faster. I really, really do. And I think if there were any way to accelerate the process, you all would figure out how to do that, because I know you're the most conscientious, hardworking people in the entire world, and you're very smart. So if there were a way to speed it up, you would have done it already, but there's not. Just thinking about how people are getting better if we really take a bigger picture perspective on it, hanging in there and being patient, giving yourself lots of rest and self-care and encouragement along the way, and having faith that it can happen. I really, truly think that full recovery is possible for everybody. I wouldn't BS you guys about that. I really wouldn't. All right. Another question, also an excellent question, actually from this same listener. She said, I would love to hear a conversation about what to expect / what it's like as one embarks on the recovery journey. For example, how do you handle the increase in anxiety? How do you deal with your heightened ED thoughts? Well, first of all, thank you for the question. That's an amazing question. If you do not have a treatment team, you need to get one. recovery does not happen on your own, and you do need to work with professionals. I think that that's really important because that's part of our job, is to help you through the eating disorder when it has temper tantrums, when we challenge it. And when you have a great team around you, it makes that so much easier to give you kind of tips and tricks to get through all the heightened anxiety. So I would recommend following up with your therapist about that. There is no magic bullet. There's no like guided meditation or something that you're going to do one time that is going to alleviate the eating disorder's anxiety and is going to make you feel settled and comfortable. It just doesn't work that way. But what we do know about this is that anxiety and the increased intense emotions, those don't last forever. The more that you eat normally, and I'm putting that in air quotes, so picture it, the more you eat normally, the more times you do that, the more practice you have with that, the less your eating disorder is going to have a fit over it, because eventually it just gets tired and gives up. It understands you're just going to eat a meal without using eating disorder behaviors, and it remits. So part of it is trusting, yes, when you change what you're doing with food and you eat food in a healthier way, your eating disorder is going to have a hissy fit, but it can't last forever. It makes me think about, this is not to trivialize the situation because I've been there and I get this, but if you've ever seen a toddler have a total meltdown, you know that they can be epic. They can be amazing. And sometimes they can be scary, but they cannot tantrum forever. They can't. And neither can your eating disorder. It's just going to make you think that pain is not going to be worth pushing through. And it is worth pushing through. So keep going, keep practicing, check in with your treatment team about the things that you can do for self-soothing and for skills and for self-care and for distress tolerance. Distress tolerance is this awesome DBT skill that I wrote about in my book, Recover Your Perspective, the book that's coming out in the fall. And distress tolerance, oh man, I can't believe I'm going to say this. I hope nobody quotes me on this, but like distress tolerance is basically choosing to hang in there even though your situation is unchangeable and it sucks and you hate it. It's making that choice to say, ugh, I don't like anything about this situation, but I'm just going to tolerate it until it passes. And sometimes that's what it is with changing your eating disorder behaviors too. Okay, let me just check on that last question and see if I missed any part of it. Oh yeah, how do you blindly trust? I don't know. I think you do it and hope for the best. And then you remind yourself why you decided to blindly trust in the first place. You know, I have said, I can't remember if I've said it on this podcast, but I frequently say, at least with clients, that in recovery, we're required to take a leap of faith. And sometimes we go ahead and we are brave enough and we take that leap of faith. And then when we're in it, we're like mid-leap, we say, can this feel less leapy? This feels like a free fall and I hate that. And I can absolutely empathize with that. I don't like feeling anxious, which I do frequently. I don't like the unknown necessarily. I prefer everything to be stable and constant, but that doesn't happen. And there's no way around the leaps of faith either. So can you jump and then just accept what it feels like to take the jump? Can you trust? Can you go back to your decision and think about why you made the decision to trust your treatment team or to trust the recovery process or to trust your decision to go to a higher level of care? You didn't do that for no good reason. You did that because you had good reasons. It's just that it feels scary because it's vulnerable. And there's no way we can completely remove the risk that is inherent in vulnerability. We need that. It enriches us. And so can we just take the leap of faith and say, yep, this feels leapy. This feels like a free fall. And I trust that this is going to be worth doing it anyway because I want recovery that much. Okay, last question. This might be my favorite question. This question says, how do I take the first step in recovery? By writing that, you just did. You just did. That makes my heart so full. I'm so happy to hear that. So the first step, I think, and this can look different. I don't know. You could go about it however you feel, whatever feels good to you. You know, maybe it means you tell a friend. Maybe it means you call your doctor. Maybe you tell your therapist who doesn't know you have an eating disorder. Whatever it is for you. But to me, it seems like a very common first step is reaching out in some way. So I would definitely recommend, if you are even concerned at all that you might have an eating disorder or disordered eating of some kind, and go back and reference my episode on the continuum of healthy eating disorders, disordered eating, and then clinical eating disorders if you want more information about that. But I would definitely say consider getting a treatment team, consider connecting with somebody. So there are all kinds of ways that you can go about that. If you know you should probably be in therapy, go ahead and find a therapist. You can do that by Googling. There are all kinds of online directories for therapists. Make sure that you work with somebody who has eating disorder specialty experience. It is not going to help you to work with somebody who doesn't have eating disorder experience. You really do need to work with a specialist on that. Another way to go about this is the NIDA website. Again, God, they just have the best info. The National Eating Disorder Association website is nationaleatingdisorders.org. I would recommend just reading through all the information on their website. It's so comprehensive. It's amazing. I'm pretty sure they have 1 million handouts about eating disorders. They have a document on there called the Parent Toolkit. I actually recommend that for anybody, even if you're not a parent, if you just want to give it to your friends and loved ones who don't know much about eating disorders. I think it's an amazing document. It's a long PDF. It has basically everything you'd ever want to know about eating disorders. It's so helpful. So check that out. Also, NIDA has a hotline that you can call. The NIDA hotline is 1-800-931-2237. And again, that number is all over their website, nationaleatingdisorders.org. They also have a chat, an online chat, so you can chat with somebody from NIDA during business hours. And they have a whole provider treatment directory. So I'm listed in there under my name, and then my treatment center in Denver is listed under there. So people who specialize in eating disorders seek out that directory to be on it. So you wouldn't be on that for no reason. And they can help find you somebody in your area who works with what's going on for you, the kind of presenting concern you have. They have all kinds of information about finances and insurance. And then also, I would say it's okay to call treatment centers too and just ask them, even if you know you don't want to go to a higher level of care like residential or partial hospitalization or IOP, even if you know that that's not what you need, treatment centers are great to call and say, hey, who are some outpatient therapists in the area? And a lot of the times treatment centers even do outpatient treatment, like ED Care in Denver does offer some outpatient treatment. And if not, they're going to help you or give you some names for people who can help you. One of the major first steps, I think, is reach out. You need to get connected with somebody who can be a part of your treatment team or be a support for you on that process. So if you're not ready to reach out to a therapist yet or dietitian yet, sorry, I always say therapist, but y'all know I'm a psychologist, so it's just kind of my lens. But just letting your friends know, maybe letting a parent know, especially if you might need them for financial help. That's a big concern that a lot of people have. I think the first step is reaching out. And if you want to reach out to me, do it. Again, my email address is podcast@eatingdisorderrecoverypodcast.com. So recovery just looks so different for everybody. And I would say trust your gut and listen to what you need, because what I needed and what other people need may not exactly fit for you. But I think in general, a good first step is reaching out and getting some resources. So with that, I just want to send a brief reminder about my coaching services. So if you want one-on-one coaching with me, just shoot me an email and we will get that set up. Other than that, we're just going to wrap up the Q&A episode. Feel free to send me any questions that you have in the future. I may wind up doing another question and answer episode at a later date as well. And always send me your show ideas for what you want to hear in the future. All right, until next time. Thanks for joining me for another episode. Let's keep in touch. You can find all the information you need about the podcast at eatingdisorderrecoverypodcast.com, including full podcast episodes and links to all of our social media sites. You can join our Facebook group for the podcast by searching Eating Disorder Recovery Podcast on Facebook. This is a closed group for listeners of the podcast looking to connect, share resources, and get involved in a pro-recovery community. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, or YouTube. Please leave us a review and let us know how we're doing. Talk to you next time on the Eating Disorder Recovery Podcast.